been a fan of yours for quite a while. Follow your website and appreciate your writing. It's always a good guide to me in making vital purchases, both hardware and software, vinyl hardware and software. So it's great to talk to you. I did want to talk to you about this, the Beatles Mono box.
Right.
I guess it's probably a good place to start is, for people who don't know, maybe you could talk a little bit about why the mono Beatles recordings are so important to Beatles fans.
Well, we'll see how important they are to Beatles fans when we see how well the box sold. But the mono was important to the Beatles. I think that's the first place to start. So are you recording this, or is it just going to be...
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, that's good. I'm much happier that you're recording it, because sometimes when I do interviews and it's paraphrased, what ends up in print had very little relation to what I actually said, and no way of, so I'm happy you're recording it. So the mono was the most important to the Beatles, right up in through the White Album, because most of the fans that were listening in mono on the radio and also at home. So that's what they really cared about. Plus, the way these were recorded with minimal tracks, they really weren't produced in a way that was conducive to releasing them in stereo, because mostly the early ones were on 2-track machines, and they switched to 4-track machines. And because, all the tracks that are on those recordings, the only way they could continue to add things was to record 3 tracks, mix it down to 1 track, keep on recording, mix it down, bounce the 1 track that was finished to another track. And it's amazing it sounded as great as it did, given how much bouncing and generation loss there was. So once they were finished with 4 tracks that were all heavily pre-mixed, there wasn't much that you could do in the way of creating quote-unquote stereo, except to assign these heavily pre-mixed mono tracks, some to the left, some to the right, some to the middle, very few to the middle, actually. It's mostly left-right. And sometimes they would be able to add overdubs and put them in the middle. So some of the tracks sounded like they were stereo, but really what you were hearing was heavily mixed mono tracks on the left and on the right, and some overdubs in the middle. So it really wasn't conducive to producing what we call stereo. In fact, Ken Scott, the recording engineer who was involved in Sgt. Pepper and the White Album and was an assistant engineer from way before that, said that the boards they had at Abbey Road at that point in time, they didn't have pan pots where they could assign things on a continuum between the left and the right. The boards were actually set up to hard pan things left to the right. And so when they actually did mix things in the middle, it happened with a great deal of difficulty.
Yeah, it didn't. I'd imagine they'd have to use 2 tracks to get anything into the middle. I would assume. I mean, I'm not sure how else they would do
right,
that.
They'd have to put it in left and right, and then it would show up in the middle. Yep.
Right. Yeah. Yes. So they focused mainly, even to the extent I understand, of like being present at the mono mixing sessions, and not. Yeah. Go ahead.
They weren't there for the stereo mixing sessions. Everything I've read says they weren't there. That those were done in haste by George Martin and some of the other people, and Jeff Emmerich. I don't even think was heavily involved in it either, although he might have been there. But they didn't care that much, and there were things left out. I mean, there were things done to the mono mix that were very critical to the Beatles that they forgot about. For instance, on "She's Leaving Home," One I'm 64 is the track. Paul insisted on the mono mix that they speed it up by a half tone to make him sound like younger, and it worked better that way. But it might have been when I'm 64. I forget.
Leaving Home is at 2 different speeds on the mono and stereo mix. I know that.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's why, because the mono mix was the way it was supposed to be.
Yeah.
And I think when I'm 64 was done that way also. He sped it up so that the clarinets on there sounded half a tone higher, and his voice sounded younger, so that it would be a bouncier kind of thing. And they just forgot about it. when they mixed it stereo. And other things happened that way too, not because it was purposeful, but because they just forgot what they had done and they didn't take good enough notes. Other things were purposefully done to make the stereo sound different from the mono to sell more records. So it's funny when I hear people say, oh, they mixed it in mono, they did this mono box set just to sell a Beatle box over again and more records. And I said, no, actually, the Beatles, said to the engineers, do it differently in stereo, because the more different it is, the more records will sell.
Yeah.
But Ken Scott did tell me that when they mixed, a lot of these tracks were mixed in mono and stereo well before the records were put out. So it's not like they sat there in one mixing session necessarily for both albums, for all these albums, and did it at one time. So Ken Scott said when they mixed Helter Skelter, Paul was there and Ken was lowering the fader at the same point on the mix where the mono one ends, and Paul reached over and said, bring it up, and they brought it up and left it for a considerably longer period of time, and then Paul said, bring it down, and I'll bring it back up. Why? Just because. Just to make it different. And that's where I got blisters on my fingers got in the stereo mix that wasn't in the mono mix.
Right. And even there's I think there's even some glaring mistakes. I mean, I'm thinking of Eleanor Rigby on the stereo mix. Isn't there a bit of ADT left over on the...
Exactly. Yeah, it pops over. It sort of starts and it pops. It's missing, and then all of a sudden it pops over.
It's really disconcerting.
Yeah.
So basically, these were the mixes that they sort of approved or were important to them. And the second thing I'd like to talk about here is the way they approached this transfer, this reissue, as opposed to previous reissues, and why that's such is so intriguing for vinyl fans or analog fans. And I'm thinking particularly about the tapes thing.
Yeah. Well, what happened for the stereo mix is it was one of these decision by committee things. And I think to a certain degree, if you heard the One album, remember that album, the One with all their hits?
Yeah.
If you listen to that, and I have the vinyl of that, it was a complete modernization, reimagining of those songs. There was compression applied. They made it pop more. They made it brighter. I mean, it sounded more like a modern kind of recording that we don't really like that much. It wasn't what was originally released, and it wasn't what's on the tape. When they did the stereo, they made a conscious decision to transfer everything. They made it for the purpose of releasing CDs. That was the point of the reissue series. Vinyl was an afterthought. And so they transferred everything flat at 192 24-bit. And then they went to work fixing mistakes, which to me, the final records are the final records. There are no mistakes. It is what it's supposed to be. You know what I mean? That's it. But that wasn't their position.
Yeah.
So they had a number of engineers working on it, and they went through all of these transfers and fixed everything in the digital domain, the little noises, pops, clicks, whatever. And they remixed George Martin in 1987 when they issued the Beatles CDs for the first time. The first 4 records were only released in mono. They didn't come out in stereo because George Martin felt those 4 in particular were not really meant to be stereo at all. And the mixes that were done on the last 2, Help and Rubber Soul, he didn't like at all.
No.
So in order to release them in stereo, he went back and remixed them again, so they could be released again in quote-unquote stereo. And even at that point, they weren't great mixes because there wasn't that much they could really do to these pre-mixed elements. Plus, he did it at 16-bit 44K. He did it at 16-bit CD resolution. So when the stereo box came out on vinyl, Help and Rubber Soul were basically CDs transferred to vinyl. So, and it wasn't the original. If you wanted the original stereo mixes, you had to buy the mono box. They're on the mono box. They're on the mono CD box.
Right.
at the end of both of those CDs. So, and the stereo LP box set, just, the early records sounded okay because they were such simple recordings to begin with. You couldn't do much damage to them. But as the music got more sophisticated, and as our recollection became more sort of seared into our brains, the versions they released on vinyl in stereo were just less and less satisfying until they got to Abbey Road, which is a travesty. I mean, Jeff Emmerich heard that and he just almost fainted at how bad it was. Because when he recorded the voices, like on Because, those voices were choreographed in terms of how loud each of the guys sang, how far off and on mic they stood in order to get this beautiful mix, this acoustic mix with room sound, with the voices sounding a certain way. And in reissuing it, they just slapped compression on it and just ruined the acoustic, ruined the whole thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, stereo box was not good. And so I wrote about it. I covered it in detail. And they came to me before it was released, and I interviewed Sean McGee, and they felt they wanted me to cover it. And I was flattered that they would come to me because, it's just very flattering. And so I did. And I did it. I was disappointed with it, but I did it with respect. I wasn't nasty. I wasn't snarky. And I tried to make them, see my point of view and our point of view of most, audio people and a lot of Beatles fans that the original records were the document, that the original tapes were not the document. What was the document was how the original tapes were applied to vinyl for release, for the most part. And I think they got it because they had already transferred the mono CDs to lacquers. They cut lacquers and plated them, and they were ready to release the mono vinyl box from the CDs. And then they changed their mind. And I got a call from the project manager, and he said to me, well, we read your coverage. It was very thorough, and you were respectful, and we've changed our minds, and so we decided to do it the way you say it should be done. Well, I was very flattered by that, as you can imagine. But I said,
Yeah, I think it clearly, were reacting to some sort of niche market pressure. There was really no reason for them to do it this way. From a broad market perspective, it had to be for people who, cared about it. But I mean, you've got a $300 to $400 investment you're making in these if you're buying it. Who's going to do that?
Well, I think what happened also is that Jeff Jones, who's the president of Apple Corps, he read the reviews. He is the keeper of the flame, essentially. He's given the responsibility. And he's been a longtime friend of Steve Berkowitz, who ended up being the reissue producer. And Steve always goes back to the analog tapes, always strives to use analog tapes to make record reissues, and always looks at the original. Even when he's doing CDs, he looks at the original pressing, as a 1A pressing of whatever he's doing, whether it's Dylan or Miles Davis, as the document.
Right.
The tape isn't always what what ends up happening a lot is they make a recording on a tape, and then when they go to master it, the artist or the producer listens to it and says, I want a little more of this, a little less of that. I want the final thing to sound a little different. And so that becomes the document, not the tape itself. In fact, there's an engineer named Roy Dunan who recorded all the very famous contemporary jazz records in the 50s and 60s, including Sonny Rollins' Saxophone Colossus and Way Out West, all these very famous
great records, yeah.
And Roy Dunan's recording methodology was to purposely boost the top end in the recording and then cut it back during the mastering, sort of like a primitive Dolby system. So were you to reissue it by taking the tape?
No, is that because he wants to lower some tape hiss on the...
Exactly, yeah. So if you were to take the tape and say, well, I'm going to be faithful to the tape, you'd be wrong. You'd be wrong. So you have to know the intent of the people who originally did the recording. And in the case of the Beatles, fortunately, there were notes. There were notes, extensive notes in the boxes, in the tape boxes, about what was done to the final cutting and why. The one thing that is different about these records is they actually had a guy at EMI who had a collection of lousy turntables that he amassed that represented the basic, the UK wasn't a big country, it isn't a big country, so there were only so many basic turntables that most of the kiddies listened on. And he had them all. And they would do a test cut, and he would play them, and if it skipped on any of those turntables, they would call the cut a kangaroo cut, because it jumped.
Now you're talking about, this was back...
The originals.
The originals, yeah.
So they would send it back to Harry T. Moss, who was the cutting engineer, and they would say, Harry, you got to bring the bass down or compress it a little bit, because this is a kangaroo cut. It's got to be able to play on a kiddie turntable. Well, for this reissue, they didn't have to worry about that.
Right.
So they didn't do that. So in actuality, these reissues in a lot of ways are better than the originals. They're more dynamic. The bass is better.
Right.
Plus the equipment's slight. It's not the same playback deck. It's not. It was different. It's different equipment.
Yeah. The only thing that has degraded, I guess, is the tapes themselves.
And not by that much, because they didn't really use the mono tapes that much.
Right.
So everything was, the only one that had trouble was the first record. The first tape was very, very old. It's over 50 years. And a lot of the splices oozed, and they could have fixed all the splices, but they decided to sort of honor the memory of the original tape by not changing, leaving it as it was, as opposed to fixing all the splices. They just said if they could leave it, they'd leave it. And they just did a one-off analog copy and then cut them together and made a cutting master for the first record. Otherwise, the tapes were actually in very good shape.
Yeah, and I guess that means you can probably hear some splices in some spots.
You don't hear them.
No.
There are splices where the tracks change. In between
in between the tracks. Okay, yeah.
But no, the tapes are in very, very good shape.
Yeah. So you, on your website, which is a great website, Analog Planet, you've gone through all these, all the records in the box set one by one, comparing them with, I think you had original copies of pretty much everything, right?
Of most of them, yeah.
Most of them to go back to. Just in terms of quality, what stood out? Well, let me just tell you right now what stood out for me, and let me see what you have to say. I read your stuff, but I want you to just sort of, now that you've lived with it a little bit longer, maybe you have a different opinion too. The thing that got me, I was enjoying going through, and I was going through them at random, but when I hit Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds on Sgt. Pepper, that's when the chills went down my spine. There's some reason, I don't know what it is, maybe it's that sort of keyboard harpsichord process, I can't remember what it is they used, just cut through you on this recording. And I had a mono copy of Sgt. Pepper before, so I was aware of the differences, but the sound of that really just...
Did you have an American or a UK?
I had an American.
Yeah, well, that's what it is.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound it. And the same with Magical. I have an original mono Magical Mystery Tour American, and it's not even in the same. It's the difference is enormous. It's huge.
Now the American, from what I understand of the American stuff, sometimes or maybe all the time, that was based on copies of tapes they would send over. They didn't.
Well, of course they didn't. They didn't send over the original tape. They would make a copy.
Yeah.
And ship it over.
Yeah.
And then Capitol sometimes would do stuff to it.
Right.
They had a little reverb. They'd soften, they'd soften things up a little bit.
Yeah.
So it wasn't the real deal. The thing is, when you take all of those pre-mixes on the Beatle albums, they were done with the intent of it all being mixed down, into a mono track. It's like a deck of cards folding together neatly. That's what was intended. So when you pull it apart and put a little here and a little there, and and then pan some sound effect that they could pan, it actually diminishes the effect.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get, look, in 1966, 67, to have spread stuff was cool, because people weren't used to stereo at that point. They were just getting used to it. So it was cool to hear stuff here, hear stuff there. But in retrospect, when you compare the mono to the stereo, the mono is just much better. Much better.
Well, and then you get these things foisted on markets like, when as a young person I was naive about this stuff. I have thinking of a copy of Miles Davis Round Midnight, electronically processed for stereo. And
right.
It's just awful. Now I listen to it now, I'm just like, why did they do this? But that was just foisted upon people. And I also think about things like, I remember the first time, I grew up with the American records, obviously, and listening to I Feel Fine and She's a Woman, what they did to them on the American. When I first heard the British ones, I thought, geez, these sound tepid, they sound weak. Yep. They didn't have that cavernous reverb.
Now, the only place you could hear the real stereo of those tracks was on that 16-track collection of oldies. That was the only place it was in real stereo.
Oh, is that that
I Feel Fine and She's a Woman? Because those were not on any Beatle albums. All the tracks on Past Masters were not on British albums.
Right.
Or most of them. Some of them are on there because they're only in mono there and no place else. And they had, like the stuff from Yellow Submarine, they happened to have mono mixes that were never released, so they put them on there. But I Feel Fine and She's a Woman were never on a British record. So maybe you heard those on, no, there wouldn't be a way. On the Past Masters 3 LP set in the stereo box.
Well, I'm going back to probably the original Past Master CDs in the 80s. I'm thinking that's probably when I heard them.
Right.
Yeah, because I grew up with. I'm of the age where I started buying these records probably around 79 or 80, and I had those Capitol records from that period, and it was all that reverb stuff.
Well, I was in college, and in the 60s, and I went to a record store. I remember all these record stores. That's one of the cool things about records is that, I could look through all the records in my collection. Pretty much, I know where I was I know what I was doing, or where I was, or who I was when I bought them. I remember walking into a small record store in Ithaca on a side street across from Johnny's Big Red Grill, and just thumbing through records. And there was this Beatles album I had never seen before. It was called 16 Golden Hits of the Beatles, and it was on Parlophone Records. And I'd never heard of Parlophone Records.
Is that the one with that illustration on the front?
Yeah, the color, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And there's all these tracks on it, and I'd never seen that record. And I'd never seen a fold-over cover. I'd never seen a laminate. I'd never seen an import at that point in time. And I said, I'll buy it. And the first song, I think, is I Feel Fine. And there it was in real stereo. And I just couldn't believe it. And then that's when I started buying imports and going on my crazy tear. Yeah, so.
Yeah. So of this set, what really, are there any highlights? I mean, I know at least you on your Analog Planet, you reviewed everything pretty favorably. Were there any real highlights that for you where something just jumped out?
Well, because I had them all in mono to begin with, UK originals. I wasn't, and I had the original Sgt. Pepper Parlophone, so I had them all, and so there was nothing shocking in terms of the mixes because I knew
right
what to expect. But Magical Mystery Tour was so much, and I had the German stereo one that has everything in real stereo, whereas the American stereo had side 2 and electronic stereo. But the difference in the sound quality of Magical Mystery Tour, straight off the tape, versus transfer to Capitol, and Capitol's bad mastering and bad pressing. It was amazingly better.
Mm.
They were all. Sgt. Pepper sounds they all sound close.
Right.
They all sound close to the originals, but in some ways better bass, more dynamic. You could say that the White Album, the top end of the original White Album was a little more tubey and open, but there was no comparison on bottom. Now which you preferred, that's a matter of opinion there. If you have an original UK, you might prefer the original, but not many people have an original UK.
Oh, and or clean. I mean, I have some 60s UK, but none of them are perfectly clean.
Right, it's hard to find an original, because if you're playing them in mono, you get away with a lot more. With a mono cartridge, a lot of stuff just disappears in mono that would show up in stereo.
Right, yeah.
If there's a scratch that produces a vertical jump, you're not going to hear that in mono. Mono cartridge still just sort of cancel out. Well, I always tell people, if you're buying mono records, you can buy mono, except for certain collectibles. You can buy mono records for 10 cents, 50 cents. People don't want them.
Right.
Except for certain records. And, like I was at a church sale, and I found a copy of it's like Phil Spector's Greatest Hits, Philly's Greatest Hits on Philly's Records. And it had, To Do Run Run, and all the great songs. And this record looked like it had been stepped on by golf shoes. Like someone had danced on it with golf shoes.
Right.
But for 50 cents, I said, what the hell, I'll buy it. And it plays perfectly. It looks like hell, but it plays perfectly with a mono cartridge.
I might have to get one of those now that you're saying it.
It's worth getting.
So, well, see, you've heard it all before already. So, I mean, do you have anything, looking back on it now, do you have anything that you prefer in stereo, looking at this, the catalog, where you say, what, really?
I can't say. No, I don't prefer any. I don't prefer anything in stereo. I still enjoy the White Album in stereo.
Yeah,
I like that. I like that in stereo, but not as much as the mono. Because when Paul does Blackbird, the acoustic guitar is all the way over to one side. He's in the middle. Well, how natural is that? So it's like Dylan's first album, the same thing.
Right.
Dylan's first album, the guitars are all the way over on one side. He's on the other, or he's in the middle. It doesn't add up.
Right. Where's the guitar? On the other side of the room?
Yeah, I like certain things about the stereo mix, but I think at this point, when I went back thinking, I haven't played the stereo Sgt. Pepper in quite some time, or the mono. I hadn't played the record in a long time, and after playing the mono, I said, well, I think I'm going to go back and play the stereo. I think I might like the stereo better, and then I didn't. Because first of all, I heard all these things stuck, put in the corner here, put in the corner there. You start hearing all these premixes, and it just detracts from the experience instead of adding to them.
Yeah.
Then once you know that the Beatles weren't involved and they didn't care, it takes more away from it.
Right. What about, I'm trying to think of what benefits, if you're talking to people who just heard, the stereo records, what record would you go to say, like, you really need to throw out that stereo record and listen to this mono? Not literally, but you what benefits the most for a person going, listening to it, going from the, to the stereo to the mono? I have one in my mind, but I'd like to hear what you have to say.
I'm not sure I understand what you mean.
In other words, what do you think benefits? Sometimes I think we're talking about Sgt. Pepper or the White Album. Listening to it, you can flip a coin, and the mono mix sounds great. The stereo mix is still pretty good.
Well, the first couple of records.
Yeah.
The first couple of records are ridiculous.
Yeah.
They weren't in stereo. They just recorded the rhythm track on one side and the vocals on the other, and then tried to bridge the gap with reverb. It's just much punchier and much better in mono. This is no comparison.
One like It Won't Be Long is difficult to listen to in stereo, and really appreciate.
Yeah, and then She Loves You was never even mixed in stereo, and so when it's in stereo on on that, well, either on the American record or on the that golden hits of the Beatles that we were talking about, it's fake stereo, and it just detracts from the song and diminishes the impact of it.
Yeah.
But this box, though, I think if this box can, if you're a real Beatles fan, you might say to yourself, well, you know what, this might get me to buy a turntable just to see what's going on, even a relatively inexpensive one. Let's say you buy a 300, like a Project Debut, Carbon Debut 3, and I put a mono cartridge on it, and then listen to it. That should be enough to convince anybody that vinyl is the superior way to listen to music.
Well, I was going to ask you that. I mean, maybe you get asked this all the time. I'm not sure, but for someone just starting out and thinking about, you do. I get sometimes people ask me, I was thinking of buying a turntable. What do you think I should do? I'd like to, hear your. I mean, it's difficult for people to make a major investment that you can make. I mean, obviously the sky's the limit. But you're talking to someone who realistically, how much should they set aside to get themselves set up, and what route would you go? Would you go used? Would you go new for the project, something like that? What would you do, or what would you recommend?
Well, you see, if you know what you're doing, then eBay's great. But if you don't know what you're doing, then it's not so great, because you don't know what's a good used turntable to buy,
right?
What's a good new turntable to buy, and you don't know how to set up a turntable, and you don't know about cartridges. It's difficult.
Right.
If you buy a new turntable, then, and you buy it from a dealer who knows what they're doing, or even an online store that knows what they're doing, they'll get it set up for you correctly, and you'll have a good experience. And, don't buy a Crosley or one of those other plastic groove chewing turntables, whatever you do. It's a disgrace.
But what about an amp? I mean, would you go to eBay for the amp, or is there's inexpensive options?
You're starting with nothing.
Yeah, I'm saying someone who's like, a lot of people do not have anything in terms of, they have their iPod, and that's it, and their headphones, and they don't have, like, I think people are a little bit older like me, and I mean certainly you, but we grew up with stereos,
Right.
But a lot of people today don't. So what would you do? I mean,
I would definitely go to eBay and buy a Japanese receiver from the 70s. There's lots of those. Yamaha Natural Sound, Kenwood, Sansui, Pioneer. Those are all fantastic. And you can usually find them very inexpensively, and they've got phono preamps in them, and they usually have mono switches. So, I mean, you're all set for buying
right.
the Beatles box.
Right. What do you think, just in terms of in vinyl in general, what's still out there? I mean, for me, I don't know what you think. I mean, I personally think of all the Beatle product that's been released since Let It Be, this has been the thing I've appreciated the most, quite frankly. As an audio fan and as a Beatles fan, I put this right at the top of the list. And I'm talking about maybe you could bring out Hollywood Bowl or something that's another must-have, essential type thing. But I don't know. What do you think in terms of how does this rank in terms of Beatle product?
Well, I think it's in terms of reissues, it's the best. It's the best. Well, there were good reissues that Parlophone did in the 80s. There was a blue box and a black box.
Yeah.
Mono. And there's a very good Japanese stereo box from the late 70s that was very, very good.
Right.
And I used to say that the big event was the red clear vinyl Odeon mono set from 1982, and those went for big bucks. I don't think they're going to go for big bucks anymore, but they went for big bucks. And when I went to Abbey Road and saw the master tapes, you could see that they made a copy. You know, it's written right there on the box. You know, copy made for Odeon in 1981. So they got a one-off master copy, and it went to Japan, and they made those records. But the Japanese have a very singular preference for sound, and they like it bright, and they like the bass rolled off. Probably because they live in these very small apartments with close proximity to the neighbors, and so they cut the bass out so it doesn't bother the neighbors or something. I don't know what.
Yeah, right.
But I used to think those were great, but now you listen to these just kill all of those.
Yeah, I think are those the what are typically called the Obi records?
Well, they have Obis. The Obi is like the sash that goes around all Japanese records.
Oh, okay. So I've got a red, I guess clear vinyl, red vinyl rubber sole with that strip. That's what you're talking about. That set, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'd be surprised if those maintain their value, other than as collectibles for rarity purposes, but certainly not for sound.
Right.
I've got a bunch of them. I'm going to sell them because I wouldn't listen to them again.
All right.
The cover reproduction is not great. The Sgt. Pepper doesn't have the lead out groove thing at the end.
Right.
And the sound is just not good.
They tinkered with it.
They did their thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, Japanese records have that. Even I'd say the stereo Japanese sets in the 70s, those are pretty good.
Well,
not as good as virtual parlophones, but they're pretty good.
Right. What are you still wishing for them? I say them to be either issued or reissued, because a lot of stuff hasn't been issued on vinyl. A lot of '90s stuff is not, at least that I know of. There's a couple things that I don't even know if they've ever made it to vinyl, or at least we're in such limited quantity that you can't find them. You know, what still needs to be reissued, or what would you like to see done with particular care?
Well, I'm wondering whether Jody Klein, if this box sells as well as I think it's going to sell, whether he would consider a mono Stones box,
mm-hmm.
and whether he would consider cutting it from the master tapes as opposed to cutting it from the DSD transfers.
Right.
I don't know. That's what I'd like to see.
Yeah.
The Dylan mono box set is great.
Yeah, I have some of those.
Great. Yep. Yeah, Stones mono box. I would like to see the Kinks albums get a good reissue.
Oh, there you go. Those early Kinks albums are almost impossible to find in regular record stores.
Yeah, well,
everywhere I go,
even the reprise ones are hard to find now. But the Pie ones you don't see at all.
Yeah, I mean, it took me a long time to find just a decent copy of something else. I mean, and these are essential records, but I never see them.
Yeah, and they've been reissued in a very willy-nilly, not a very, some of them have been reissued. I have a few of the reissued. The Village Green got reissued, but not the way it should be done.
I've never seen that. So there is a reissue of that. Yeah, see, I'd love to get that record, and I've never found it.
But it wasn't done right. It wasn't pressed on great vinyl. There's no record of what source was used. There's nothing. So that should be done over again. Yeah.
I heard you once. One last thing before I let you go, if you don't mind. You again probably get asked this all the time. I've seen you asked before about some of your favorite recordings, vinyl recordings. I guess we could just stick to rock pop because you can go off into all kinds of places with classical and jazz.
Yes, I can go off. I can just go off and off and off. I'll tell you what's a great record. If you could find the first pressing of Ogden's Nut Gonna Flake by Small Faces.
Really?
That Glyn Johns engineered that, and that was that beat out Sgt. Pepper in the 1967 New Music Express Best Album of the Year.
That's interesting. I've got that, but I don't believe I'm almost positive it's not original. I got to go dig it up now.
You might have an American pressing on that was when Immediate was a division of Columbia Records, and they just lopped the bass off. They just killed it.
I remember not being very impressed with it.
Well, the original is the sound on the original is mind-boggling. The bass goes so deep, it's hard to believe it's actually on a record.
Right.
Side 2 is an acquired taste. It's got that comedian who does doublespeak,
right,
telling the story of Happiness Stan. I find it charming. Not everybody loves it, but Side 1 is a blockbuster.
Yeah, I recently, whenever it came out, I had reviewed the box set for the Small Faces, and had not been exposed to them too much, so I got to live with them for a while and came away loving a lot of that stuff. I mean, really being impressed at how ahead of their time they were.
Yeah, and Steve Marriott is to me one of the top 3 or 4 rock singers ever.
Underappreciated.
Yeah, I love Steve Marriott. I would like to see the Roxy Music catalog get reissued properly. I would like to see Brian Eno's catalog come out on vinyl. They did a very good job on the CDs, but I'd like it to come out from the analog tapes properly.
Okay, so what was released, because I have a couple of those, but what was released was then off of CDs or off of digital masters. I'm talking about like Here Come the Warm Jets and.
Well, I haven't seen vinyl reissues of those. Have you?
I believe I've got. I'm pretty sure they're not originals. I would think they're reissues. I thought I had one that had a Japanese thing on. Actually, if you wait a second, I'll take a quick look.
Oh, they came out in Japan in the 70s. Every record under the sun known to man came out as a Japanese reissue in the 70s. And records that were released before the 70s, of course.
Yeah.
I used to think those were great. I used to think those were the best. But they're not. The vinyl is extremely quiet and they're well pressed. But again, the EQ is just not right.
Well, I've got a Here Come the Warm Jets that's got a sash on it that seems to me fairly recent. It's a Polydor label, but...
Wait, I'll pull mine, which I bought in the 70s, and we'll see if it's the same. Hold on. Is it MPF 1168?
MPF 1168. I'm looking on the jacket here, and I've got 23mm0124. And it's on the sash too, 23mm0124.
Oh, that's probably a later Japanese reissue.
I think
How many yen is it?
It is 2,800 yen.
How many?
2,800.
28. Yeah, mine is 2,500 yen. So mine I bought in the 70s.
This to me looks brand new. In fact, I think I bought it in a shrink wrap.
Is it a red label Polydor?
Yes.
And when you look in the inner groove area, it says is it MPF? What number is it saying on it?
In the inner groove,
so mine says MPF-1168B, A and B.
No, it's still it's 23mm0124, A and B.
Yeah. So it's a later reissue, but not that much later. It was only 300 yen more.
Right.
Because by now, it would be much more expensive.
I guess another Green World is on Black Island, so I guess that's how
Another Green World is on British Island, American Island.
I don't know. It's Black Label.
That's American Island. Yeah, you should find a British island of that. It's unbelievable.
Okay.
Actually, it's funny because I have every time I see a copy of any of these Eno records on UK pressings, I buy them if they're in good shape, just to have them. Because to me they're collectible, they're classics. They'll only appreciate in value. Not that I buy them for that reason, but maybe I'll find one that sounds better than the other one. So I was in the UK in November and I found a copy. And I bought it, and it's a different mastering than all the other ones that I have. and I think it's an actual original. I think all the ones I have are like a second pressing, even though the label's original. All the ones that I've had up until that one were mastered at EMI because they have all the EMI codes similar to the Beatles albums. This other one has a different kind of matrix that's similar to other earlier Island albums that I have from the 60s. So I assume this one is really the original. And it sounds so much better than the other three that I have that it's mind-boggling. Amazing.
Well, speaking of that, while I got you on the phone, I got to ask a question that I can't seem to get a good answer to while we're on this subject, and that is, where do I find a good In the Court of the Crimson King? What?
Well, okay, the MoFi is pretty good.
Okay.
There's a reissue that came out last year or 2 years ago that's very, very good from the analog tape.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I compared it to the MoFi, and it's better. I don't have a Pink Label Island because that goes for almost $1,000 now, and it's crazy.
All right. Because I have two copies, and I had one that's probably that, I don't know if it's an 80s collector series, whatever that was called, or EG something.
Right.
And then I found an early Atlantic, which is cut, it sounds a lot hotter than that EG copy.
No doubt. So the question is, what numbers are in the inner groove? What are the squiggles? What do you got there?
You want me to look, or are you just sort of saying?
Sure, go ahead. I'm going to multitask because I have things I have to do. But
hold on a second. The only other problem with this is it's beat to hell. Matrix-wise, this has got, is it STA or ST? What is that? SG? Or no, SD?
What does it say?
SD? Tough to read.
What's the address at the bottom of the label? Is it 1841 Broadway, or does it have the Warner logo?
It's the 75 Rockefeller.
75 Rockefeller. Okay, so that's a later pressing.
Okay, all right.
But still, does it have a P17 in the? What's the writing on the inner groove area?
I got an AT. I got a 6917. It's like 691700C.
What is it?
It looks like
STS?
STA maybe, or STF.
STA, yeah, STA.
691700C, and
is it
99C also?
Is it handwritten or is it stamped?
It's handwritten.
That's good. Okay, so it's STS.
I want to say ST. It's either A or H.
Look on the bottom of the record, on the label. So the number will be there also.
STA.
STA.
STA. 691699 PR is on one side one.
PR. Okay, that's PR means it was pressed at I forgot the name of the plant. So that's pretty early actually.
I mean, I could definitely. It's a remarkable difference, and just putting it down. But I would love to get something closer to the original on this if I could.
Well, if you go on eBay, you'll find it, but you'll pay for it.
Yeah, well, maybe wasn't aware of the reissue, so maybe I could hunt that down.
Yeah, try to see what you can get one. I'll look right now. It takes 2 seconds. Let's see what I can find.
Yeah. It didn't come as one of these, like, they did that thing with Weezer and with Sigur Rós, where they took these great albums and they made them like $50, $60 bundles.
Right. Okay, here's a rare Atlantic pressing, one bid at $5. Let's see. Here's the reissue. Here's the 20-gram reissue. It's $35.
Yeah.
Buy it now.
Yeah.
I think if you do that, you can't go wrong.
Yeah, that sounds good. Well, I'm glad I asked.
Okay. Well, let me just see what else I can find there. Just for the hell of it. You reminded me of something that I have to just take care of. So let me just send this email.
Okay.
Hold on a second.
I'll look this up while we're talking. I mean, we order it while we're talking.
Okay, took care of that. Now, let me go back to see what's. Here's one, $24 from Canada. If it's Canadian pressing, you don't want it. Let's see. Doesn't say. This is a person who doesn't know how to sell records. Oh, those are people you have to avoid. Let's see what the rare pressing is. The rare pressing. Used. Atlantic ST 8245. Strange matrix. I have trouble finding info. Side A reads STA 6917C-2 LW. He doesn't even. Let's zoom over the.
Well, I'm looking at Amazon. They've got a 200-gram vinyl for $12. Limited edition.
Maybe it's the same one used. But here, this one's got 1841 Broadway.
Okay. So that should be earlier, right?
Yeah. Well, someone's written King Crimson on the jacket. If you care. I don't know if you care.
I'm never big on jackets.
Vinyl is very good. Some light and sparse wear. Very good. I don't know. If it's one bid for $5, if you can get it for 10, what the hell? Well, let's see. So, West German, original Atlantic LP 1841, $17 their best offer. That's good.
A West German copy, you're saying?
No, I wouldn't get the German copy, but I'm just saying here's one.
Oh, in West Germany.
Pointing, but it's only, it's not good enough. Vinyl is very good minus the good scratches. You don't want that. But there's a lot of them,
Right.
You go through them. Just stick with an American 1841 or get the reissue, which is very good.
I think I thought I was reading things about, that even, I don't know, that maybe only the original was cut from the original master tape, or some of the even early reissues weren't as good, but I don't know.
It depends. And the original's always going to be better.
Yeah.
Here's one with a sticker for $30 with the sticker on it. That's pretty good. Let's see if it's in good shape. Visually near mint. Some paper scuffs. Plays very good plus or so. But he doesn't. It looks like it's got the deep groove label, so it must be an original. And he said it's got the original sticker. You can't go wrong for that.
But these would be on Atlantic. These would be the American versions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But you're saying the island stuff is probably hard to find, I imagine.
There's another one. Oh, you'll find the island, but you'll pay. There's a lot of them on here. 1841 Broadway for $27-$28.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. There's another one. First 1961 pressing, $34.40. Ultrasonic cleaning. Okay. 20% off. Can't go wrong. Obviously, a very popular record. There's a Japanese pressing. I wouldn't want that one.
Now, I don't know if you're a fan.
Here's an island pressing. It's not a pink label island. It's the orange. It's the rim label. So it's a second press. Let's see what he says about it. And it's $100.
Yeah.
So that's not bad.
That's not.
Considering. But the American is probably pretty good.